According to my likes, dislikes, and everything in between, statistically, Metaknight should be the greatest character of all time in my eyes. Let me explain. My two absolute favorite colors are blue and purple. And I tend to like them even more when they're together, and especially when they're highlighted with either yellow or black. And lo and behold, that's essentially Metaknight's color palette. And I know what you're thinking. Do I like him only because he has my favorite colors? No, not even close. I like him for an entirely different reason. And it's not just because I thought he was a villain when I first saw him in Smash Bros. And had no idea who he actually was. No, one of the reasons I like him is because why I thought he was a villain. For my little example here, take a look at these two characters. Tell me which one real quick who you think the villain is. If you said it's the character that actually looks cool and badass, then yes, you'd be right. It's the Ghost. Now, it's not just in Pac-Man. I tend to see this in a lot of media, but majority of the time, the villains have a really sick design and the heroes, well, sometimes the heroes are just literal yellow orbs. Now, applying this way of thinking, you can see why I thought Metaknight was like the main villain of Kirby. He looks really cool. Of course, him being some dominant overlord who wishes to destroy everything is far, far from the truth. He's actually a very good boy. But you can see why I didn't think he was in the beginning. That leads me to my third point, masks. Concealing identity with masks. Holy cow, I don't know why, but every character I stumble across that does this, I'm in love with. There's just something about a character who has something to hide that intrigues me greatly. And speaking of fashion choices, another thing I really like is armor, followed by my weird obsession with giving everyone I love capes. Every chance I get to give a character a cape or a cloak, there is a difference, I will. And it's not just because it's an amazing drawing shortcut of not actually having to draw any body parts. No, that's totally not the reason I got into it. It's just that they look so cool. Another point I must bring up about fashion isn't really fashion, but just something to do with your body in general. I like characters with scars. Big, heapin' scars. And though Metaknight himself doesn't particularly have one, his dark counterpart, Dark Metaknight, does. And speaking of dark forms, I may or may not have a huge thing for characters who have versions of themselves that are completely grayscale and evil. I also have a serious habit of smacking wings on characters, specifically bat and dragon wings. So, you know. And if you couldn't tell already, I do love myself a good villain. However, I don't despise the heroes. In fact, there are several heroes that I actually prefer over their villains. So when there's a absolutely perfect middle ground in the form of a noble yet very suspicious anti-hero, I am in heaven. Oh, and who would have guessed it? That's exactly what Metaknight is. Even going as far as doing things sometimes that make you think he's a villain, but it ends up being for a very noble cause, and he's actually just trying to protect and save everyone. And speaking of saving people, I have a character trope I am completely in love with for no reason whatsoever, and who would have guessed it, Metaknight fits it. And that is when an older character finds a younger one, which is like really hurt or something, preferably on death's bed, takes them in and is like, yeah, you're my responsibility, you're my child now. And Lord knows why I like it so much. But interestingly enough, that's kind of Metaknight's relationship with Sword and Blade in the show. At least that's kind of how I see it. If you guys aren't familiar, Metaknight's little backstory in the show on how he met Sword and Blade was that he was living through a post-apocalyptic intergalactic war, which, holy crap, by the way, that in itself was so hard to say, but it sounds so cool. And that's how he met them. Two dying children on the side of the road, desperately trying to survive by stealing other people's stuff. They attempted a robbery with him, and rather than giving him a whooping in the butt, he ended up saving them from a monster because, you know, good boy. After he saved them from the monster attack, he ended up saving them from dying on the side of the road by taking them in. And I think that's really, really cute. Now they're both his little followers, and he loves them so much. And like I mentioned before, Metaknight was a Star Warrior, a soldier in a war. Not to mention a post-apocalyptic war. And if you know me good enough and have seen my Wattpad with my Ninjago Abandoned Dayu story, link in the description, you know that I love post-apocalyptic stories. Which I suppose, now that I'm thinking about it, is really weird considering all the things I said I like, and I've never watched The Last of Us. In any case, I love Apocalypse Core, and I love galaxies. And I really like the idea of some post-apocalyptic war going on. So all of those shoved together? Yeah, there's a reason I am in love with this backstory. So to recap really quick, he is literally my favorite color scheme ever. For a good guy, he has a seriously sick design akin to something that would be on a really cool villain, which is awesome. He is a perfect example of good guy with a dark side. And he has a literal dark side in Dark Metaknight. Dark Meta Knight has a scar. Both of them are characters who hide their identities behind a mask. He has armor and he has cape. Not to mention his cape is torn in the flashback where he meets Sword and Blade. Like, ooh, I love a good torn cape. And he has my favorite trope of finding homeless, dying children and giving them a reason to live and taking care of them. I still have absolutely no reason why I like that trope so much. He has dragon-like bat wings. So cool. Not to mention that he's secretly adorable. Not to mention in Dreamy Gear, Kirby's little steampunk series. Oh, by the way, I love steampunk. He's wearing a top hat. How freaking cute is that? And it doesn't just stop with top hats. He has a fedora too. Also, everything revolving him in the show is insanely dark for a children's show. And boy, do I love it when children's shows get dark, but this dude straight up cuts monsters in half like he's crazy. But let us not forget the most important part. He has an accent in the show.
It is better for Top to believe in himself right now. A knight should have much more skill.
So, statistically, according to everything I've just said, Meta Knight should be my favorite character ever. And you know what? With everything I've just said, I think he just might be. But you know what would make this even better? If he was a robot, kind of like how I really like Zane because of the wait a minute.